The Barrett M107 kicked like a mule. At 2,400 yards, the target looked like a postage stamp through the scope. The wind was gusting east at 12 miles per hour, temperature dropping as the sun dipped toward the Virginia horizon. Every variable screamed impossible. Tessa Blackwood didn't flinch. Her finger found the trigger. Between one heartbeat and the next, she squeezed. The .50 caliber round exploded from the barrel with a sound like thunder splitting stone. 3.8 seconds of flight time. An eternity compressed into the space of a breath. The crowd of Navy SEALs stood frozen, eyes glued to spotting scopes. Then the metallic clang echoed across the range. Dead center. Jake Hawthorne, legendary SEAL sniper and holder of the 10-year record, stood with his mouth half open. His hands hung at his sides like he'd forgotten they were attached to his body. "Who the hell taught you to shoot?" Tessa lowered the rifle. Her hands were steady, but inside her heart hammered against her ribs. She'd spent 5 years running from this moment. 5 years pretending she was just a bartender with student debt and bad memories. 5 years trying to forget the old man who'd raised her to be more than she believed she could be. She met Jake's eyes, green on blue, truth on disbelief. My grandfather, Colonel Declan Blackwood, Ghost. Maybe you've heard of him. The color drained from Jake's face like someone had pulled a plug. 48 hours earlier, the world had been simpler. The Anchor Bar smelled like stale beer and broken promises. It sat 3 blocks from the Naval Special Warfare Compound in Virginia Beach, where men who'd seen things they couldn't talk about came to drink away the things they couldn't forget. Tessa wiped down the same section of bar for the 3rd time. Her shift had started at 4. It was now past 11. Her feet ached. Her back ached. Her bank account definitely ached. 26 years old and working 3 jobs just to keep her head above water. The American dream reduced to survival mode. The Friday night crowd was thick with SEALs fresh off deployment. You could always tell. They laughed too loud at jokes that weren't funny and went silent when anyone mentioned home. They drank like men trying to wash away sand that had worked its way into places soap couldn't reach. Jake Hawthorne held court at the corner table. 44 years old, built like a man who'd forgotten how to quit, with salt and pepper hair and eyes that had seen half the wars America fought in the last 2 decades. His voice carried across the bar with the easy confidence of someone who'd earned his bragging rights in blood. 2,380 yards. Kandahar, 2014. Headshot on a Taliban commander who thought he was safe behind a ridge. Jake paused for effect, then knocked back his whiskey. Still unbeaten in SEAL history. His buddies raised their glasses. One of them, a younger operator with a fresh haircut and newer scars, shook his head in admiration. "Nobody's touching that, Reaper. That's God-tier shooting." Tessa felt the words leave her mouth before her brain could stop them. "My grandfather shot farther." The table went quiet. Then Jake's head swiveled toward the bar like a turret tracking a target. "What'd you say, sweetheart?" The endearment landed like a slap. Tessa set down her rag. Every instinct screamed at her to back down, apologize, go back to being invisible. But something else rose up from a place she'd buried 5 years ago. Something that sounded like an old man's voice saying, "Don't ever let them make you small." She spoke louder. "My grandfather, 2,520 yards. Afghanistan, Operation Anaconda, 2002. The bar didn't just go quiet, it went dead. 30-some operators and veterans turned to stare at the 5'3" bartender with auburn hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of tired eyes that came from working 3 jobs and wondering if life would ever get easier. Jake stood up, slowly, the kind of slow that meant trouble. He walked to the bar, leaned against it, smiled the way a shark smiles at something bleeding in the water. "Little girl, you know what 2,500 yards even looks like? That's a mile and a half. That's farther than most people can see with the naked eye. I know exactly what it looks like. And who was this grandfather, Mr. 2,520 yards? Colonel Declan Blackwood. They called him Ghost. Jake's smile froze. Behind him, one of the older SEALs, a grizzled operator in his 50s, let out a low whistle. Ghost Blackwood. Jesus Christ. That man was a legend. Jake didn't take his eyes off Tessa. And you're telling me Ghost Blackwood taught you to shoot? From the time I was 12 until he died. When was that? 2019, 5 years ago. Jake studied her face like he was reading a map, looking for tells, looking for the lie. Whatever he saw there made him straighten up. All right, tomorrow, 0800, Virginia Beach Long Range Precision Complex. You make one shot at 1,000 yards. I'll apologize and buy you dinner. Tessa felt her pulse spike. 1,000 yards, in front of SEALs, in front of Jake Hawthorne, in front of people who would know immediately if she was full of shit or actually had the skills she'd claimed. And if I break your record? Jake's smile came back, wider now. Dangerous. Then I'll give you $50,000 and buy this whole damn bar for you. He extended his hand across the counter. But you won't. Tessa looked at his hand, looked at his face, looked at the 30-some men watching this moment like it was the most interesting thing to happen all month. She thought about her grandfather, about the metal box hidden in a storage unit with a letter she'd been too scared to follow, about 5 years of running from the truth because facing it meant accepting that the old man hadn't died of natural causes. She shook Jake's hand. His grip was firm, calloused. The hand of a man who'd spent decades holding rifles and climbing ropes and doing things most people only saw in movies. Tomorrow, 0800. The drive to the cabin took 4 hours. Tessa left Virginia Beach at midnight, her beat-up Honda Civic rattling over back roads that wound west into the Blue Ridge Mountains. The cabin sat in a hollow in West Virginia, surrounded by oak and pine, accessible only by a gravel road that turned to mud when it rained. She hadn't been back since the funeral. 5 years of avoiding. 5 years of pretending that not looking at something made it disappear. 5 years of being wrong. The headlights caught the structure at 2 in the morning. Small, single story, windows dark like closed eyes. The workshop beside it looked even more forsaken, its door hanging slightly open, creaking in the wind like it was breathing. Or crying. Or both. Tessa killed the engine, sat in silence. The mountain sounds filled the space. Crickets. The distant call of an owl. Wind moving through branches like breathing. Like the forest itself was alive and watching her return. She made herself get out of the car. The front door key was where she'd left it, under the third stone on the left side of the porch. The lock resisted, then gave with a grudging click. Inside, the smell hit her first. Dust, old wood, the faint ghost of pipe tobacco that Declan had smoked on winter evenings while reading Jack London and Hemingway and telling her stories about places he'd been, and things he'd done, and lessons he'd learned about what it meant to be strong when the world wanted you weak. Everything was exactly as she'd left it. Furniture covered in sheets like corpses waiting for burial. Kitchen frozen in time. A coffee cup still in the sink from the morning he died. His reading chair by the window, book still open on the side table. Call of the Wild. He'd been reading it the week before his heart had supposedly given out. Tessa didn't turn on the lights. She knew the way by heart. Through the kitchen where he'd taught her to clean rifles. Past the bedroom that had been hers from age 19 to 24, when her world had ended and he'd rebuilt it piece by piece. Down the stairs to the basement. The basement was where Declan had built his range, 100 feet long, reinforced walls that could stop a .50 caliber round, professional ventilation system that cost more than most people's cars. At the far end, paper targets hung on a mechanical system that could be adjusted for distance. The near end held a shooting bench, sandbags, and a gun safe the size of a refrigerator. She opened the safe with a combination she'd never forgotten. 3, 12, 68, her birthday and his. The rifles were still there, cleaned, oiled, maintained even in abandonment, like he'd known someone would come back eventually. An M40A5, a custom Remington 700 with a stock he'd carved himself from walnut. A Shytac M200 intervention that looked like it belonged in a science fiction movie and could reach out and touch targets at distances that seemed impossible until you understood the math. And next to them, notebooks, dozens of them, Declan's shooting journals. Tessa pulled one out at random, opened it. His handwriting filled the pages. Meticulous notes, wind calculations done by hand with corrections for temperature and humidity. Elevation tables, ballistic coefficients, all done without computers, without apps, just math and observation and 50 years of experience compressed into spiral-bound notebooks that represented a lifetime of learning. A loose page fell out. She caught it. The handwriting was shakier than the rest. Recent, maybe from the week before he died. Emma, it read. Then he'd crossed that out, started again. Tessa, if you're reading this, it means you've finally come back. Good. That means you're ready. Remember what I taught you. Shooting isn't about the gun. It's about understanding the world. Wind, distance, gravity, time, all the invisible forces that shape the path between here and there, between intention and result, between who you are and who you could be. You're better than I ever was. Don't let anyone tell you different, especially not yourself. The box is under the workbench, third floorboard from the left wall. You'll know what to do. Love always, Grandpa. Tessa's hands shook as she set the paper down. She hadn't cried at the funeral, hadn't cried during the investigation that concluded nothing suspicious had happened, hadn't cried when she'd sold his truck and closed out his accounts and pretended that cardiac arrest at 76 was normal for a man who ran 3 miles every morning and could still outshoot men half his age. She cried now. Alone in a basement shooting range at 2 in the morning, she cried for the old man who taught her that strength wasn't about size or gender or any of the bullshit the world tried to tell you. For the years she'd wasted being scared. For the letter she'd ignored because following it meant admitting he'd been right all along. That something was wrong. That his death wasn't natural, that the truth was darker and more dangerous than she'd wanted to believe. When the tears stopped, she wiped her face with her sleeve, stood up, walked to the workbench where he'd spent countless hours reloading ammunition and maintaining equipment, and probably planning for contingencies she'd never know about. The third floorboard from the left wall lifted easily. Underneath, wrapped in oilcloth like something precious, was a metal box, military grade, waterproof, locked. She didn't open it, not yet, not until she'd proven she deserved to, not until she'd honored his memory by doing the thing he'd trained her for. First, she had a record to break. The Virginia Beach Long Range Precision Complex opened at 0700. Tessa arrived at 0730, dressed in jeans and Declan's old field jacket. The jacket still smelled like him. Gun oil and pine and the mentholated rub he used for joints that remembered too many parachute jumps and too many miles carrying too much weight. The range sprawled across 300 acres of carefully maintained terrain, multiple buildings, berms, target stands at distances from 100 yards to 3,000. It was where SEALs and Marines and FBI snipers came to push the limits of what was possible with a rifle and determination, and the willingness to practice until the impossible became routine. Jake's truck was already in the parking lot, so were 6 others. They'd drawn a crowd. Word had spread. The bartender who claimed Ghost Blackwood was her grandfather. The girl who thought she could shoot. This was going to be entertainment, a story to tell. The day they watched someone get humbled by reality. Tessa walked toward the main building. Her stomach felt like it was trying to escape through her throat. Every step closer made her more aware of how insane this was. She was a bartender. She hadn't fired a rifle in 5 years. She was about to try to outshoot a Navy SEAL with a decade-long record in front of God and the entire Special Operations community. Jake stood by the entrance with 3 other men. All of them had the look. The haircuts that said military, even in civilian clothes. The scars that told stories they'd never share. The way they stood that said they'd learned to read threats before they became problems and respond before conscious thought caught up. "Didn't think you'd show," Jake said. But he didn't sound mocking anymore. He sounded curious, intrigued. Like maybe he'd done some research overnight and found out that Ghost Blackwood wasn't just a name. He was a legend. And legends didn't raise granddaughters who talk shit they couldn't back up. "I don't say things I don't mean." "We'll see. Range is set up. Target at 1,000 yards to start. If you can hit that, we'll talk about distance. If you can't, you buy the next round at the bar and we forget this ever happened. Deal?" Deal. He led her through the building to the outdoor range. More people had gathered, 20, maybe 30. SEALs, Marines, a few civilians who had the weathered look of veterans who traded uniforms for flannel, but never really left the service behind. One old man sat apart from the others, watching with eyes that didn't blink, and a stillness that said he'd learned patience in places where impatience got you killed. The target stood at the far end of the range, a steel plate 18 inches across. At 1,000 yards, it looked like a dime held at arm's length, a joke, an impossibility for anyone who hadn't spent years learning to see what others missed. Jake gestured to the shooting bench. An M40A6 lay there, equipped with a Nightforce ATACR scope worth more than Tessa's car. Bipod, suppressor, the kind of setup that screamed professional. Government money, zero compromises. Weather's decent, 68 degrees, wind easterly at 7 to 9 miles per hour, humidity at 65%. He pulled out a small device, a ballistic calculator, started punching in numbers. Ever shot past 500 yards? A few times. This isn't like shooting beer cans in your backyard. At 1,000 yards, the bullet drops 30 feet. Wind drift can push it 6 feet left or right. You have to account for the Earth's rotation, the temperature of the barrel, the density of the air, the phase of the moon if you want to be really precise. He was trying to intimidate her, or maybe help her. Hard to tell with men like Jake. Men who'd spent so long at war, they'd forgotten how to communicate without layers of challenge and respect mixed together like alloys forged under pressure. "Here, this'll tell you the corrections you need to make." Tessa didn't take the calculator. Instead, she knelt behind the rifle, pressed her cheek to the stock, looked through the scope. The target swam into view, blurry. She adjusted the focus until it sharpened. Behind it, grass rippled in the wind. To the left, a flag hung from a pole, snapping and relaxing with each gust. She closed her eyes. Declan's voice came back like he was standing right behind her, like he'd never left, like death was just another distance to calculate and compensate for. "Feel it first, the wind on your face, the temperature of the air, the way your breath moves in your chest. The rifle is just a tool. You're the weapon. You're the guidance system. You're what makes the difference between close and perfect." She opened her eyes, looked at the grass again. The wind was consistent, pushing from right to left. 7 miles per hour, Jake had said. Maybe 8. She watched how the grass moved, how the flag responded, timed the gusts in the lulls, found the pattern. 1,000 yards, wind at 8 miles per hour, 90 degrees to the line of fire. She did the math in her head the way Declan had taught her. No calculator, no app, just understanding of physics and ballistics in the way the world worked when you paid attention. Bullet weight was probably 175 grains based on the rifle and the intended use. Velocity around 2,600 feet per second. Time of flight, roughly 1.4 seconds. In that time, an 8-mile-per-hour crosswind would push the bullet approximately 7 inches off course. At 1,000 yards, that translated to about 2 mils of correction on the scope. Elevation was easier. At 1,000 yards with this rifle and ammunition, she needed approximately 28 minutes of angle. The scope clicks were quarter-minute adjustments. 112 clicks up, She made the adjustments. Didn't rush. Each click, precise. Deliberate. The way Declan had taught her. The way champions did everything. With intention. With purpose. With the understanding that excellence was built from thousands of small decisions done right. Jake watched her. You know what you're doing? My grandfather taught me. With a ballistic calculator? With math and patience. And the belief that if you understand how the world works, you can make it work for you instead of against you. She settled into position, rifle snug in the pocket of her shoulder, grip firm but not tight, breathing steady. She watched the grass, waited for the pattern. Wind gusted, relaxed. Gusted, relaxed. Nature had rhythms if you learned to see them. On the next relaxation, she stopped her breath mid-exhale, found the natural pause between heartbeats where the body went still and steady, and the rifle became an extension of intent rather than a separate object. Squeezed. The rifle barked. The suppressor muted the sound to a sharp crack instead of a boom, but the recoil still pushed back into her shoulder. She'd braced for it, wrote it out, returned to the scope to see where the impact would be. 1.4 seconds stretched into forever. Long enough to doubt every calculation. Long enough to wonder if 5 years away from practice had dulled her edge. Long enough to remember every reason this was stupid and reckless and destined to fail. Then the metallic clang of bullet meeting steel echoed across the range. The crowd erupted. Shouts, curses. Someone threw their hat in the air. Another man started laughing like he'd just witnessed a miracle or a magic trick and couldn't tell which. Jake stared at the target through a spotting scope. His expression had gone blank. Professional. The face of a man processing information that didn't match his expectations. Dead center, maybe 2 inches high. That's within minute of angle at 1,000 yards. He lowered the scope, looked at Tessa like he was seeing her for the first time. Not a bartender, not a girl, a shooter. Someone who belonged in the same category as the professionals surrounding them. Do it again. She did. Same process, same calculations running through her head like equations that had become instinct. Same steady breath and patient trigger press. Same trust in physics, in training, and the old man who taught her that impossible was just a word people used when they didn't understand the math. Clang. Jesus Christ, someone muttered. Jake's jaw worked like he was chewing on words he couldn't spit out, like he was recalculating his entire worldview based on 2 shots from a woman he'd underestimated. 1,500 yards. Let's see if that was luck. They moved to a different position. New target. The steel plate looked like a pinhead now, a speck, an abstraction rather than something real and hittable. The wind had picked up, gusting to 12 miles per hour, temperature dropping as clouds moved in from the east, changing the air density, changing the ballistics, changing everything. Tessa ran the numbers again. 1,500 yards. Longer time of flight meant more wind drift, more drop, more variables stacking on top of each other like a house of cards that would collapse if any single assumption was wrong. The Earth's rotation became a factor at this distance. Coriolis effect. At this latitude, shooting east, it would push the bullet about 3 inches right. She had to compensate. She adjusted, waited, shot. 3 seconds of flight time. Long enough to doubt, long enough to second-guess every calculation, long enough to wonder if this was the shot that proved she was a fraud after all. Clang. The old man who'd been sitting apart stood up, walked toward them with the careful gait of someone whose knees remembered too many jumps from too many planes. 70-something, face weathered like old leather, creased with lines that told stories of deserts and mountains in places where maps feared to tread. He stopped next to Jake, looked at Tessa with eyes that had seen ghosts. She's right, Jake. She won't miss. Jake turned. Boone, what the hell are you doing here? The old man. Boone. He didn't answer Jake. He kept his eyes on Tessa with an intensity that made her skin prickle. Your grandfather sent me. Well, technically he sent me 5 years ago. I've been waiting for you to be ready, Tessa Blackwood. The range went quiet again, different from before. Not the quiet of anticipation, the quiet of revelation, of secrets about to surface. Tessa felt the world tilt slightly sideways. You knew my grandfather? Sergeant Major Boone Collier. I served with Declan for 20 years. Afghanistan, Iraq, places that don't have names on any map. Places where things happened that will never make it into history books. He smiled, but it was sad around the edges. Haunted. He told me about you, showed me pictures, said if anything happened to him, I should watch over you. Make sure you found your way back. Back to what? To this, to who you really are. Boone gestured at the rifle, the range, the impossible shots she just made like they were easy, like she belonged here. You're Ghost Blackwood's granddaughter. This is in your blood. But more than that, he paused, seemed to choose his next words carefully, like he was about to cross a line that couldn't be uncrossed. Your grandfather didn't die of a heart attack, Tessa. He was murdered. And now that you've shown what you can do, now that you've proven who you are, he looked around at the crowd, at the men who'd watched her shoot, at the cell phones that had recorded everything, at the evidence spreading across social media that Ghost Blackwood's granddaughter just broke a 10-year SEAL record. They'll come for you too. Jake set up the final challenge himself, 2,400 yards. His record stood at 2,380. He was giving her 20 extra yards. Room to beat him definitively. Room to prove this wasn't luck or a few good shots. Room to prove she was the real thing. The target sat at the absolute maximum distance of the range. A steel plate, 2 feet across, that looked like a mirage through the shimmer of heat rising from the ground. At this distance, the bullet would be in the air for almost 4 seconds. 4 seconds where wind, gravity, air density, temperature gradients, and a dozen other variables could push it off course. 4 seconds where everything had to be perfect. My record shot was in Helmand Province, Jake said. He wasn't bragging now. His voice had gone flat, professional. The voice of someone delivering an after-action report. 2,380 yards. Taliban commander who'd killed 6 Marines the week before. Wind was gusting 20 miles per hour. I had a spotter calling corrections. I had time to calculate. I had perfect conditions, and it still took me 4 shots to make the hit. He looked at Tessa, really looked at her, seeing past the bartender exterior to whatever was underneath. Today, temperatures dropping, winds shifting every 30 seconds. You'll be shooting at a target over 1.5 miles away. The bullet will be in the air for almost 4 seconds. Anything can happen in 4 seconds. I know. I'll shoot first, show you how it's done. Then you can try. He took position behind a Barrett M107, 50 caliber, the kind of rifle that could punch through engine blocks and turn cover into concealment and make shots that seemed impossible to anyone who hadn't spent years mastering the weapon. He had a ballistic computer, a wind meter, 2 spotters with high-powered scopes calling corrections in real time. He spent 10 minutes calculating, adjusting, recalculating. The computer spitting out numbers that accounted for every variable that could be measured. Everything except the ones that couldn't, the ones that required feel and experience, and the kind of knowledge that only came from making the shot 1,000 times until your body knew what to do before your mind caught up. Finally, he shot. Through her spotting scope, Tessa watched the impact. 8 inches left of center. Close, impressive, but not perfect. Jake cursed. Shot again. 6 inches right. Third shot. 4 inches high. Each one closer, but none of them quite there. The wind was playing games, gusting and dropping and swirling in patterns that the computer couldn't quite predict because weather wasn't code and nature didn't follow algorithms. He stood up, faced Tessa, respect in his eyes now mixed with frustration. Winds impossible, gusting between 10 and 15 miles per hour, changing direction every minute. Even with the computer, I can't get a reliable solution. The math keeps changing faster than I can adjust. Tessa didn't respond. She was watching the range, not the target, the grass, the trees, the way the flag moved on its pole, the way dust devils formed and dissipated, the way heat shimmered off the ground in patterns that told stories if you knew how to read them. She'd learned this from Declan when she was 14. How to read wind by watching the world. How grass ripples differently in 5-mile-per-hour wind versus 10. How trees sway with a rhythm you can measure if you're patient. How flags snap and relax in patterns that repeat if you watch long enough. She watched for 5 minutes, timed the gusts with her internal clock, found the pattern. Every 2 minutes the wind would gust hard, 15 miles per hour. Then it would die down, drop to 8, maybe 9. Hold there for 30 seconds, then gust again. Nature's rhythm, predictable if you paid attention. She needed to shoot in that 30-second window. She took position behind the Barrett. The rifle was massive, made the M40 look like a toy. The scope was set for Jake's eye relief. She adjusted it, checked the level, made sure the bipod was stable on the bench, made sure everything was as perfect as it could be before the trigger broke and the bullet left, and nothing else mattered except physics and fate. 2,400 yards, wind averaging 11 miles per hour with gusts to 15. Temperature now 65 degrees and dropping. Humidity rising as more clouds rolled in. Air density changing. Ballistics changing. Everything in flux. The math was complex. Time of flight would be close to 4 seconds. At 4 seconds, even small errors would be magnified into complete misses. Wind drift at 11 miles per hour would push the bullet roughly 12 feet right. But the gusts would add more. Maybe another 6 feet during a gust. She needed to shoot during the lull. During those 30 seconds when the wind dropped to 8 or 9 miles per hour and held steady. Elevation drop at this distance was catastrophic. Over 100 feet. The bullet would start traveling at 2,800 feet per second and arrive at barely 2,200. Drag would slow it exponentially. Air density, temperature, humidity, all of it affected the flight path in ways that compounded with every yard traveled. She dialed in her best estimate, 51.5 minutes of angle elevation, 6.8 mils left for wind, extra zero point 0.2 mils for Coriolis. All of it approximate, all of it based on feel and experience, and 15 years of training with a man who'd made these shots when they actually mattered, when lives depended on precision, when failure meant people died. Then she waited, watched the flag, watched the grass, timed the gusts in her head. 1 minute. Gust hits, flags snapping horizontal, grass laying flat, everything screaming, "Don't shoot now." 30 seconds. Wind dying, flag relaxing, grass standing back up, the window opening. She settled into the rifle, slowed her breathing, found the target in the scope. A steel blur in the distance that might as well have been on the moon. 20 seconds until the next gust. Her finger found the trigger. Not on it yet, just near it, ready, waiting for the moment. 15 seconds, wind dying, flag hanging limp, grass settling, the world going still like it was holding its breath. 10 seconds. She pressed her cheek tighter to the stock, felt the rifle become an extension of her body, an extension of will, an extension of everything Declan had taught her about patience and precision and refusing to miss when it mattered. 5 seconds, breath out, half exhale, natural pause. The place where the body went still and the heart slowed and everything aligned. Heartbeat, the space between beats, the moment of perfect stillness. She squeezed. The Barrett roared. 50 caliber leaving the barrel with enough energy to stop a truck. The recoil hit like being punched by a professional fighter. The suppressor directed the blast forward, but the shock wave still rattled her teeth and made her ears ring despite the hearing protection. 4 seconds. Nobody breathed. 30 men with spotting scopes and binoculars, all focused on a target a mile and a half away. 4 seconds that felt like drowning, like falling, like every mistake and doubt and fear compressed into the space between firing and knowing. Then the sound reached them, a clear, unmistakable clang of metal meeting metal, of physics behaving exactly as predicted, of impossible becoming possible, becoming done. The spotter nearest to the target lowered his scope. His voice carried across the sudden eruption of noise. Dead center, perfect hit, 2,400 yards, new record. Jake stood frozen. His face cycled through disbelief, shock, and something that might have been respect, or might have been the realization that everything he thought he knew about shooting had just been challenged. He walked to where Tessa was standing, the Barrett still smoking on the bench behind her. He extended his hand. "I'll have the 50,000 transferred tomorrow, and I'll start looking at bars for sale." She shook his hand, felt the calluses, the strength, the acknowledgement of one shooter to another, the unspoken language of people who understood what it took to make the impossible shot. "Who taught you to do that? Really? No bullshit." "My grandfather, Colonel Declan Ghost Blackwood. He was Army Special Forces, served in the Gulf War, Somalia, and 3 tours in Afghanistan. He taught me that shooting isn't about the gun. It's about patience, observation, respecting the invisible forces that shape everything. Wind, gravity, time, pressure, all of it working together or against you, depending on whether you understand it." Jake's face went pale. Behind him, the older SEAL she'd heard whistle earlier stepped forward. Ghost Blackwood. That man was a living legend. They say he made a 2,500 20-yard shot in Operation Anaconda. Headshot on an Al-Qaeda commander from a ridge position nobody thought was possible. No computer, no spotter, just him, a rifle, and 20 years of knowing how to read the wind. The shot was so clean, they didn't find the body for 3 days because nobody believed anyone could shoot from that distance. Tessa felt her throat tighten. "He never told me about that. He never talked about his missions. Said they were classified. Said some things were better left in the mountains where they happened." They were classified. Most of them still are. The missions that actually mattered, that actually changed things, those are the ones nobody talks about. The man shook his head. But those of us who knew, who served with him or trained under him, we knew we were in the presence of greatness. The kind of greatness that doesn't need recognition because it knows its own value. Boone Collier appeared at her elbow. Up close, she could see the scars better. A long one on his neck that looked like a knife wound that almost killed him. Smaller ones on his hands from shrapnel or broken glass, or the 1,000 small violences that accumulated over a career of controlled aggression. The map of a life lived in harm's way. "We need to talk, Tessa. Somewhere private, somewhere they can't hear." "They who?" He looked around the range, at the crowd, at the men taking photos and videos of her record shot, at the evidence spreading across social media that Ghost Blackwood's granddaughter just broke a 10-year SEAL record and announced to the world that she existed, that she had skills, that she was visible. The people who killed your grandfather, the people who've been waiting 5 years for you to surface. You just lit up like a flare, girl, and now they know exactly where you are. Jake had been listening. His expression shifted, hardened, the easy smile gone. "Boone, what the hell are you talking about? Ghost died of a heart attack. I read the report, natural causes." That's what they wanted everyone to believe. Boone's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "But Jake, you know better. You've known better since your stepbrother died in Afghanistan, since Garrett Stone's body was never recovered, since NCIS shut down every question you asked and told you to drop it for national security reasons." Jake's expression changed, hardened like steel being quenched. "How do you know about that?" "Because Garrett was on the same team as me and Declan. Operation Anaconda. We found something the brass didn't want found. something that people with power and money didn't want revealed, and they've been killing us ever since, one by one, making it look like accidents, making it look like natural causes, making it look like anything except murder. The mountain wind picked up, cold now, carrying the smell of coming rain. Around them, the crowd was dispersing, but slowly. People still watching, still curious about the small woman who just done the impossible, still recording, still spreading the word. Tessa looked at the rifle, at the target a mile and a half away, at the old man who'd appeared like a ghost himself, carrying secrets that had been buried for over 20 years. At Jake, whose face had gone from friendly competition to something darker, something that spoke of personal stakes and old wounds reopen. My grandfather left me something, a letter. It said to find you. It said you'd know what really happened. It said to trust no one else. Boone nodded slowly. Not here. Too many eyes. Too many ears. There's a place we can talk. Safe. Off the grid. No surveillance. No recording. No way for them to know what we're saying. He glanced at Jake. You should come too. This involves you more than you know. More than you've probably guessed even after all your digging. Jake looked like he wanted to argue. Then he looked at Tessa, at the determination in her eyes that probably mirrored the determination he'd seen in Ghost Blackwood's face 2 decades ago when the old man had decided that some truths were worth dying for. All right, but I'm armed. And if this is some kind of, it's not. Boone's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty. I've been waiting 5 years to tell this story, waiting for Tessa to be ready, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the pieces to align. He smiled, but there was no joy in it, only grim determination. Turns out the right moment is when you break a record in front of half the SEAL community and make yourself the most visible target on the East Coast. Tessa felt ice slide down her spine. She'd come here to honor her grandfather, to prove that his teaching hadn't died with him, to win a bet and maybe get enough money to stop living paycheck to paycheck and wondering if she'd ever crawl out of the hole Debt had dug. She hadn't come here to start a war. But looking at Boone's face, at the scars, in the sadness, in the grim determination in those old eyes, she understood something that made her stomach clench with fear and excitement and a strange sense of purpose she'd been missing for 5 years. The war had started 22 years ago, in the mountains of Afghanistan, in a place called Operation Anaconda, and her grandfather had been fighting it in secret until the day someone had put him in the ground and called it natural causes. Now it was her turn to pick up the rifle, not to shoot targets at impossible distances, not to break records, but to finish what Ghost Blackwood had started, to find the truth, to expose the people who'd killed good men for the crime of doing the right thing, to make sure that Declan's legacy wasn't just about distance and windage and the perfect shot. It was about refusing to miss when the target was justice itself. Boone's truck was a 30-year-old Ford Ranger that looked like it had survived multiple wars and maybe a few natural disasters. Rust spotted the wheel wells like a disease spreading. The passenger door didn't match the rest of the body, painted primer gray instead of faded blue. The seats were cracked vinyl held together with duct tape. But when he turned the key, the engine started with a purr that spoke of meticulous maintenance underneath the deteriorating exterior. The sound of priorities, function over form, survival over aesthetics. Tessa climbed into the back seat. Jake took the front. Neither of them spoke as Boone pulled out of the range parking lot and headed west, away from Virginia Beach, away from the coast, away from civilization, toward the tangle of back roads that wound through rural Virginia like veins carrying blood to forgotten places. They drove for 40 minutes, through small towns that consisted of a gas station and a church and nothing else, past farmland where tobacco still grew in defiant rows, despite everyone knowing it was a dying industry, into hill country where the trees pressed close to the road and the houses sat far back from the asphalt, connected by dirt driveways that disappeared into the woods, like secrets being swallowed by the earth. Boone finally turned onto one of those driveways. The truck bounced over ruts and rocks for another 10 minutes before a house appeared. Small, single-story, vinyl siding that had seen better decades. Surrounded by enough land that the nearest neighbor was measured in miles, not yards. The kind of place where you could scream and nobody would hear, or where you could hide and nobody would find you, depending on your needs. He killed the engine, sat for a moment with his hands on the wheel, staring at the house like it held memories he wasn't sure he wanted to revisit. Before we go inside, I need to know you're both committed to hearing this. Once you know, there's no unknowing. Your lives will change. You'll become targets. You'll have to decide what you're willing to sacrifice for truth that's been buried for over 20 years. Truth that powerful people have killed to keep hidden. Jake spoke first. His voice was steady, certain. My stepbrother died in 2003. They told my family it was an IED, blown up during a patrol. No body recovered, no investigation, just a flag and a form letter, and a casualty assistance officer who couldn't answer any questions. I've spent 20 years trying to find out what really happened. So yeah, I'm committed. I'm all in, whatever it takes. Boone turned to look at Tessa in the back seat. His eyes were sad, understanding. And you? You've been running from this for 5 years. You could keep running, take Jake's $50,000, move somewhere new, change your name, start over. Your grandfather would understand. He'd want you safe more than he'd want you involved in this. Tessa, I need the kind of minimalism that came from decades of living out of duffel bags and learning that possessions were just things that weighed you down. A couch that had seen better decades. A kitchen table with mismatched chairs. Walls covered in maps and photos that Boone quickly took down and flipped over, hiding whatever they showed before Tessa could see clearly. He made coffee, strong enough to strip paint, the kind that tasted like motor oil and felt like it could wake the dead. Grimace. Garrett Stone was our communications specialist. 3 others rounded out the team. Good men, professional, the kind of operators you'd trust with your life because you had to. Jake's hands tightened around his cup. They told us Garrett died a year later. Different operation, different circumstances. They said he was a hero, that he'd saved lives, that it was quick and he didn't suffer. That's what they wanted you to believe. Boone's voice went flat. Professional. Peter clipped photos, handwritten notes, the kind of file that shouldn't exist because it represented someone keeping records of things that were supposed to stay forgotten. Set it on the table with reverence. Or dread, hard to tell which. We found the commander, but we also found something else. Americans, 3 of them. Not soldiers, contractors, civilian clothes, expensive gear, working for a private military company called Vanguard Solutions. Tessa leaned forward. The truck's bed was covered with a tarp, but the edge of the tarp had lifted, revealing wooden crates underneath. Stenciled markings on the crates, foreign characters. Those crates contained weapons. Chinese-made AK-47s, RPGs, ammunition, enough to equip a small army. We watched them for 3 days, documented everything. They were selling weapons to the same Taliban fighters who were killing American soldiers 20 kilometers away. Selling to the enemy. Your grandfather managed to clone one of their laptops. We had a tech specialist who could do things like that. We found financial records. Vanguard wasn't just selling weapons. They were buying opium from Afghan warlords. Huge quantities. Shipping it out through Pakistani contacts. Using the profits to buy more weapons. Using those weapons to arm Taliban fighters. Creating a cycle. A machine. The more the war continued, the more opium they could buy, the more weapons they could sell, the more money they could make. $847 million in fraudulent contracts between 2002 and 2008. Vanguard had contracts with the Department of Defense, security contracts, logistics contracts, consulting services. They were billing American taxpayers while simultaneously funding the enemy. making sure the war never ended, because ending the war meant ending their profits. Tessa felt sick. Her stomach churned. The coffee tasted like ash. My grandfather found proof of this? He copied everything. The laptop had it all. Names, numbers, transaction records, wire transfers to offshore accounts, photos of the opium shipments with Vanguard logos clearly visible, email correspondence between Vanguard executives and DoD officials discussing contract extensions and mission parameters. Proof that American contractors were prolonging a war that killed American soldiers for profit. For fucking profit. Jake's voice came out strangled, angry. What happened when you reported this? What did command say? Boone's laugh was bitter, sharp, like broken glass cutting air. We didn't report it through normal channels. Your grandfather was too smart for that. He knew how deep this went, knew that Vanguard had people everywhere. Pentagon, State Department, probably CIA. He smuggled the hard drive out, mailed it to a dead drop, an old contact who could hold it safely. Then we filed our official report, said we'd eliminated the Taliban commander. Mission successful. Nothing unusual to report. Went back to business as usual. He took another sip of coffee. His hands shook slightly. Age or anger or the weight of memories, impossible to tell. 2 weeks later, Lieutenant Garrett Stone died in what they called a vehicle accident. Humvee rollover, body burned beyond recognition, military funeral with full honors. Except Garrett wasn't in any vehicle that day. He was on base, nowhere near where they said the accident happened. But the official report said vehicle accident, and the official report is what goes into the record, and the record is what becomes truth. Jake stood up so fast his chair fell over. The sound crashed through the small house like thunder. You're telling me they murdered him? And you just let them? You just stood by and watched them cover it up? We had no proof. Boone's voice rose to match Jake's anger. No way to prove anything without revealing what we knew. And the moment we did that, we'd all be dead. Don't you understand? These weren't street criminals. These were people with billions of dollars in connections at every level of government. People who could make anyone disappear and call it an accident, and nobody would question it. The room went silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of wind in the trees outside. The kind of silence that follows violence or the threat of it. Tessa found her voice. It came out quieter than she wanted. Smaller. You said they've been killing you ever since. Who else? Boone pulled out another document. A list of names with dates next to them. Dates of death. Causes of death. All of them official. All of them accepted. All of them lies. Sergeant Marcus Webb. Training accident, 2004. Shot during live fire exercise by unknown friendly fire. Investigation concluded it was a tragic mistake. Case closed. Corporal Travis York, suicide, 2005, found hanging in his barracks room. Except Travis was the happiest man I ever knew, had a wife and 2 kids he adored, was planning to retire and become a teacher, left no note, no warning signs, but the official cause of death was suicide, and who questions that? Specialist Ryan Cross, vehicle rollover, 2007. Single car accident on a straight road in broad daylight. No skid marks, no signs of evasive action. Just drove off the road and down an embankment and died. Bad luck. Tragic. But these things happen. He looked up from the list. His eyes were wet. By 2007, it was just me and your grandfather left. 2 out of 6. The others all dead within 5 years of finding that laptop. All dead in ways that look like accidents but weren't. Couldn't be. The odds were too long. The pattern too clear. They were being eliminated, systematically, professionally, by people who knew how to kill and make it look natural. We made a pact, your grandfather and me. We'd hide the evidence, bury it deep, wait for the right moment, stay alive, stay quiet. Let them think we'd forgotten. Let them think we were no threat. Play dead until we could figure out how to expose this without getting killed in the process. For how long? Tessa's voice came out as a whisper. 17 years. We stayed quiet for 17 years. Your grandfather retired, bought his cabin, lived like a hermit, taught you to shoot, lived a quiet life and never talked about Afghanistan or what we'd found or the brothers we'd lost. I did the same. Different state, different life, minimum contact. We only communicated through dead drops, old school tradecraft from the Cold War. Nothing digital, nothing that could be intercepted or traced. We thought if we stayed invisible, if we never gave them a reason to worry, they'd forget about us. They'd move on. They'd assume the threat had passed. Jake had picked his chair back up, sat down heavily. But they didn't forget. No, in 2019, your grandfather contacted me through the dead drop, said someone had approached him, came to his cabin, expensive suit, professional, offered him $10 million to destroy the hard drive, to forget everything, to die quietly with his secrets buried, said it would be better for everyone, that nobody wanted to dig up ancient history, that the war was over, and what did it matter now? Tessa's hands clenched into fists, her nails dug into her palms. He refused. Of course he refused. Declan Blackwood didn't know how to do the wrong thing, even when it would save his life. Even when it was the smart play. Even when everyone would have understood if he'd taken the money and walked away. Boone's voice cracked slightly. He called me the night before he died, used a payphone, said if anything happened to him, I should find you, wait for you to be ready, make sure you knew the truth, make sure his death meant something. The cardiac arrest. Tessa could barely force the words out past the lump in her throat. It wasn't natural. Potassium chloride injection causes cardiac arrest that looks completely natural unless someone's specifically testing for it. And why would they? 76-year-old man, lives alone, found dead in his workshop, no signs of struggle, no visible wounds, everything consistent with a heart attack. By the time they found him, it was too late. The potassium would have metabolized. The autopsy showed nothing unusual. Case closed. Old man dies of heart attack. Sad but expected. Nobody questioned it. Nobody had any reason to question it. The room spun slightly. Tessa gripped the edge of the table. Her grandfather, the man who'd raised her, who'd taught her to shoot and to think, and to never let the world make her small. Murdered, killed in his workshop while she'd been living her life in ignorance. While she'd been too scared to follow his letter, too scared to ask questions, too scared to be anything except a coward. Who? The word came out like a bullet, hard, angry, demanding. Who did it? Boone reached into the folder one more time, pulled out a single photograph, placed it on the table with the careful reverence of someone handling explosives. The photo showed a man in his mid-40s, handsome in a corporate way, expensive suit, American flag pin on his lapel. He was shaking hands with someone whose face was cropped out of the frame. Behind them, other men in suits. A conference room, money and power captured on film. Sterling Kane. He was VP of Operations for Vanguard Solutions in 2002. The man running the show in Afghanistan. The man who signed off on the weapons deals and the opium purchases and everything else. Now he's CEO of Sentinel Global Security. Same company, different name. They rebranded in 2010 after Vanguard got too much bad press from investigative journalists who were asking uncomfortable questions. Tessa studied the photo, memorized the face, the easy smile, the confidence of a man who'd never faced consequences, who'd built an empire on corruption and violence and knew he was untouchable. He's 66 years old now, worth an estimated $2.3 billion. Sentinel has contracts with the Pentagon, CIA, NSA, Homeland Security, State Department, every agency that matters. He's untouchable, connected to every level of government, has senators on speed dial, and generals at his dinner table, and enough money to make problems disappear before they become public. Jake leaned over the photo. His face was hard, carved from stone, and he ordered the hits on your team. I can't prove it, can't prove any of it without the hard drive. But yeah, Kane was the one who had the most to lose. The laptop we copied had his name all over the financial records, his signature on the transfer orders, his email authorizing weapons sales to Taliban contacts, his instructions to subordinates about how to structure the contracts to avoid oversight. He knew what we found, and he's been eliminating witnesses ever since. Tessa looked up from the photo, met Boone's eyes. You said my grandfather hid the hard drive. Where? Boone smiled. It was the first genuine smile she'd seen from him. The smile of a man appreciating cleverness, respecting intelligence. That's the genius part. Declan knew they'd come after anyone he associated with, anyone who might know where the drive was hidden. So he didn't tell anyone, not even me. Not a single person in the world knew the location. Then how? He left you clues, in his letter, in his journals, in the training he gave you. Everything you need to find it is in the knowledge he passed down, in the shared experiences and memories that only you have. He understood that the best encryption isn't digital. It's memory, shared experience, the kind of knowledge that can't be tortured out of someone, because only one person in the world has the right combination of skills and memories to decode it. Tessa pulled the letter from her pocket, unfolded it carefully, read it again with new eyes, with understanding. The GPS coordinates, 34.8794 degrees north, 79.0128 degrees west. Jake looked over her shoulder. North Carolina, that's somewhere in the Uwharrie National Forest, middle of nowhere. Declan bought land there in the 90s, 20 acres of nothing, no structures, no improvements, no reason to own it except as a place to hide something you never wanted found. Boone stood, walked to one of the maps he'd hidden earlier, flipped it back over. The map showed North Carolina. A red X marked a location in the middle of nowhere. He buried it there, I'm sure of it, but I don't know exactly where. The coordinates will get you to the general area, but it's 20 acres of dense forest. You could search for months and never find it without more specific information. Tessa stared at the letter, at her grandfather's handwriting, at the words that had seemed like paranoia 5 years ago, and now read like a treasure map written in blood. Instructions from beyond the grave. He said I'd know what to do. Yes. He trained me for this. Yes. She closed her eyes, thought back through 15 years of training. Declan teaching her to shoot, to read the wind, to calculate trajectories, to observe, to remember, to see what others missed, to understand that everything was connected if you paid attention. And suddenly, she understood. The bullet casing, in the metal box. Boone's eyebrows rose. What about it? He left me a bullet casing, .3 Lapua, engraved with Ghost 2520, Anaconda 02. That shot, the record shot everyone talks about, the 2,520-yard shot. He used it as a marker, as a key. She opened her eyes, looked at the map, understanding crystallizing like ice forming on water. The hard drive is buried at the exact distance and direction from the coordinates as his record shot. 2,520 yards. I need to calculate the direction based on something in his training. Something only I would know. Something personal. Jake whistled low. That's brilliant. Even if someone found the coordinates, they'd have no idea where to actually dig. They'd need to know the distance and the bearing. Without that, it's just 20 acres of forest and a needle in a haystack. But you know, Boone wasn't asking. He was stating, confirming what he already believed. Tessa thought hard. 2,520 yards from the coordinates. But which direction? North? South? East? West? Her grandfather would have used something meaningful. something she'd remember, something that connected to her specifically. Then it hit her. My birthday, March 12th. That's the 71st day of the year. 71 degrees. That's the bearing. 71 degrees from true north. She grabbed a protractor from Boone's drawer of supplies. Then back at the map, processing, understanding, realizing that Ghost Blackwood had created a puzzle that required his granddaughter's specific knowledge to solve. That couldn't be broken by torture or coercion because the key was experience and memory and love compressed into training and shared moments. Damn, Jake said softly. Ghost taught you well. We leave tonight. Boone was already moving, pulling gear from closets, rifles, ammunition, night vision equipment, medical supplies, everything needed for a tactical operation deep in hostile territory. Because that's what this was, war. If they've been watching Tessa, and they have been, they know she came here. We have maybe a 6-hour head start before they figure out what we're doing and where we're going. Jake pulled out his phone, stared at it, put it away without making a call. What? Tessa asked. I was going to call for backup, other SEALs I trust, but who can I trust? If Kane has Pentagon connections, he has military connections, law enforcement connections. Anyone I call might be compromised, might be on his payroll, might report back before they help. So it's just us three. Boone handed Jake a rifle. M4A1, military grade, the real thing, not a civilian clone. Like the old days, small team, dark of night, get in, get the objective, get out. Except we're not 25 anymore. Jake checked the rifle with practiced efficiency, loaded a magazine, chamber check, safety check, everything automatic. And the objective isn't a Taliban commander. It's evidence that could bring down a billionaire with friends in every government agency and the resources to make us disappear without a trace. Which is why we move fast, grab the drive, get it somewhere safe, then we figure out how to go public without getting killed in the process. Boone was loading magazines. His hands moved with the speed and precision of someone who'd done this thousands of times. We can't keep it, can't sit on it. The moment they know we have it, they'll come after us with everything. Our only safety is mutual assured destruction. They know that if they kill us, the drive goes public automatically. Tessa watched them prepare. 2 old warriors gearing up for one more mission, moving with practiced efficiency despite the years and the scars and the arthritis that probably flared up when it rained. She felt like an imposter, a bartender playing soldier, a girl with good aim, but no real experience in the kind of violence that was probably coming. Then she remembered the shot she'd made that morning. 2,400 yards, dead center. No computer, just skill and patience, and 15 years of training from the best sniper she'd ever known. The best sniper most people would never know existed because his greatest work was classified and buried and forgotten, except by the people who'd been there. She wasn't an imposter. She was Ghost Blackwood's granddaughter. And this was what he'd trained her for. Not the shooting was just the test, the proof she could handle pressure, could make the impossible shot when everything was on the line. This was the real mission, the one that mattered, the one her grandfather had died fighting. Give me a rifle too. Boone handed her a Remington 700, the same model Declan had used, the same model she'd trained with for years. She checked it like he'd taught her. Magazine, chamber, safety, scope, everything perfect, everything ready. They loaded into Boone's truck as the sun dipped below the horizon. 3 hours to North Carolina. Then a night hike through the forest to find a hard drive buried 22 years ago by a man who'd known he might not live long enough to retrieve it himself. A man who trusted that his granddaughter would be smart enough and skilled enough and brave enough to finish what he'd started. The truck's headlights cut through the gathering darkness as they pulled onto the main road. Behind them, Boone's house sat dark and silent, a safe house that wasn't safe anymore, a temporary refuge that had expired the moment Tessa had broken that record in front of witnesses. Jake watched the mirrors. Black Ford Explorer, 3 cars back. Been there since we left your place. Boone's jaw tightened. Spotted him 5 minutes ago. Professional tail. Keeping proper distance. Probably has backup vehicles rotating position. Standard surveillance procedure. Can we lose them? Not without confirming we know they're there. Better to let them follow for now. Make them think we're oblivious. We'll ghost them when we're closer to the objective. Tessa turned around carefully, looked through the rear window. The Explorer was there. Dark, tinted windows, keeping perfect distance. Neither too close nor too far. The kind of tale that spoke of training and experience. What happens when we get to North Carolina? Then we disappear. Boone took a turn. The Explorer followed at exactly the same interval. I know these roads. No places where GPS doesn't work and cell towers don't reach. We'll ghost them the old-fashioned way, using terrain and darkness and the skills they stopped teaching when everything became about technology. They drove in silence for another 30 minutes. The Explorer never wavered, never closed distance, never dropped back. A patient predator waiting for the right moment to strike. Jake's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen, frowned. Text from an unknown number says, "Stop digging or everyone dies." The words hung in the truck like smoke, heavy, toxic, undeniable. They're trying to scare us off. Boone's hands were steady on the wheel. Decades of staying calm under pressure. Means they're not ready to move yet. They want us to quit, walk away, go back to our lives and forget this ever happened. Forget we know what we know. Will they let us? Tessa asked. The question that mattered. The question that determined whether this was a rescue mission or a suicide mission. If we stopped right now, turned around, would they leave us alone? Boone met her eyes in the rearview mirror. The truth was there before he spoke it. Your grandfather tried that for 17 years. Stayed quiet, stayed hidden, minded his own business. How'd that work out for him? The answer was obvious. The answer was a 76-year-old man dead in his workshop with potassium chloride in his system and a death certificate that said cardiac arrest. There was no walking away. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. The moment Declan had copied that laptop, the moment he'd refused to destroy the evidence, the moment he'd chosen truth over safety, he'd set this in motion. And now Tessa was caught in the current, swept along whether she wanted to be or not. They had started something by breaking that record, by proving who Tessa was, by connecting the dots between Ghost Blackwood's granddaughter and the old man who'd been murdered for knowing too much. The only way forward was through the darkness, through the forest, through whatever Sterling Kane and Sentinel Global Security threw at them, all the way to the truth that had been buried for 22 years, waiting in the North Carolina soil like an unexploded bomb that could bring down empires and destroy careers and expose corruption at the highest levels of American power. Boone turned onto a smaller road, then a smaller one. The Explorer followed, patient, relentless, a machine following programming, an algorithm playing out in real time. Jake pulled a device from his pack, small, electronic, looked at the screen. His face hardened. GPS tracker, under the rear wheel well. They've had it there for at least a day, probably longer. Of course they had. They'd known about Tessa before she'd even made the shot, had been watching, waiting, tracking her movements with electronic precision. The shot had just confirmed what they'd suspected. that Ghost Blackwood's granddaughter wasn't just a bartender, that the skills had been passed down, that the knowledge hadn't died with the old man. And now they were following that knowledge to the place where secrets were buried, the place where truth waited like a loaded gun. Boone pulled off the main road onto a dirt track barely wide enough for the truck. The vehicle bounced over roots and rocks. The Explorer followed, its headlights painting shadows through the trees, getting closer now, less patient, sensing that time was running out. "Hold on!" Boone killed the headlights. The world went dark. Only moonlight filtered through the canopy. He accelerated. The truck lurched forward blind. Branches scraped the sides with sounds like fingernails on a chalkboard. Something crunched under the tires. Metal or wood or bone. Impossible to tell. Behind them, the Explorer's headlights vanished as it too went dark. But Boone knew this road, had driven it 100 times in preparation for moments like this. He took a hard left onto a trail barely wider than the truck itself. Branches closed in from both sides. The kind of trail you'd miss if you didn't know exactly where it was. The Explorer missed the turn. Its brake lights flashed red in the darkness. Too late. By the time they corrected, Boone had gained a quarter mile, maybe more. He drove for another 10 minutes, twisting, turning, following paths that weren't on any map, that existed only in the memory of old soldiers who'd learned that sometimes the best weapon was knowing the terrain better than your enemy. Finally, he pulled the truck into a ravine and killed the engine. Silence rushed in, the forest breathing around them. No headlights, no engine sounds, just the wind in the trees and the distant call of an owl hunting in the darkness. "We walk from here, 5 miles to the coordinates. If we move fast and stay quiet, we can be there by midnight, retrieve the drive. Be gone before they figure out where we went." They geared up in the darkness, rifles, night vision, water, first aid. Boone moved with practiced efficiency, Jake with the precision of muscle memory that never really forgot. Tessa tried to keep up, copying their movements, hoping her body remembered enough of Declan's training to not get them all killed. They moved into the forest in tactical formation. Boone on point, Jake rear security, Tessa in the middle with the GPS unit, guiding them toward coordinates that represented either salvation or damnation, depending on what happened in the next few hours. The forest was alive with night sounds, crickets, frogs, small animals moving through undergrowth. A fox called somewhere distant. The creek they were following gurgled over rocks worn smooth by centuries of water wearing down stone. Tessa's heart hammered. Every shadow looked like a threat, every sound like approaching danger. But Boone and Jake moved with calm confidence, weapons ready, eyes scanning constantly, bodies loose and prepared for violence that might not come, but probably would. After an hour of walking, Boone raised a fist. Everyone stopped. He pointed. Through the trees, in a small clearing ahead, 6 figures moved with tactical precision. Dark clothing, weapons, night vision goggles. Professional operators doing professional work. They'd beaten them here, somehow. Despite the tail shaking, despite the tracker removal, Sentinel had predicted where they were going and gotten there first. Had set up and were waiting. Jake leaned close to Boone's ear, whispered something Tessa couldn't hear. Boone nodded, made hand signals, the kind of wordless communication that came from years of operating together. They backed away slowly, circled around. The forest became their ally, concealing their movement, masking their approach with wind and animal sounds in the general chaos of nature at night. It took another 30 minutes to get into position. Ridgeline overlooking the clearing, 200 yards of separation, high ground advantage, the tactical gift that determined battles. Through the night vision scope on her rifle, Tessa could see them clearly now. 6 contractors, professional, military bearing. They were digging, had already dug 3 holes in different locations, searching, testing, looking for the hard drive using methods that would take them days to cover 20 acres. Weeks if they were being thorough. They didn't know about the calculation, about the 2,520 yards at 71 degrees, about the specific spot next to the creek bend where Declan had buried his insurance policy all those years ago. They were searching blind, hoping, guessing, using resources and manpower to make up for lack of intelligence. Boone pointed to a location 50 yards from where the contractors were digging. That was the spot, the real location. They could see it from here. A distinctive rock formation, the creek bend, exactly where Tessa's calculations had predicted. But between them and that spot stood 6 armed men who'd been sent to kill them. Jake leaned close. His breath was warm against her ear. "Can you make the shot?" She looked through the scope. 200 yards, night, moving targets, wind minimal, temperature cool, visibility good with night vision. The kind of shot that would have been easy in daylight, harder now, but not impossible. "Yes. If this goes bad, we'll need you to cover us. Boone and I will move to the location, retrieve the drive. You keep them pinned down, keep them from flanking us, keep them from killing us." Can you do that? Could she? Could she shoot at human beings? People who would die if her bullets found their marks? People with families and lives and dreams that would end because she pulled a trigger. She thought about her grandfather, about Garrett Stone and Marcus Webb and Travis York and Ryan Cross, about all the soldiers who died in a war that had been prolonged for profit, about the men who'd made billions from blood, about justice and right and wrong, and whether any of it mattered when the alternative was letting evil win because you were too scared to do what needed doing. Yes, Boone checked his watch, looked at Jake. Some wordless communication passed between them, the language of men who'd fought together, who'd trusted each other with their lives in places where trust was the only currency that mattered. They moved, silent as ghosts, down the ridge, into the forest, toward the rock formation and the buried truth that could change everything. Tessa stayed on the ridge, rifle steady, breathing controlled, watching through the scope as 2 old warriors crept through the darkness toward a destiny 22 years in the making. The contractors hadn't spotted them yet, were still focused on their methodical search pattern, digging, testing, looking in all the wrong places because they didn't know how Ghost Blackwood thought, didn't know about calculations and distances and the way a father figure leaves clues in the training he gives his granddaughter. Boone and Jake reached the rock formation, started digging, fast but quiet, dirt flying in controlled amounts, disciplined, professional, the product of decades doing this kind of work. One of the contractors turned, raised his night vision, scanned the area. Tessa's crosshairs settled on his chest. 200 yards, center mass. An easy shot by any standard, but it would announce their presence, would start a fight they might not win. Her finger touched the trigger. Not yet. Not unless necessary. Hold fire until the moment demanded it. The contractor's radio crackled. He responded, turned away, went back to supervising the dig. Boone's hand disappeared into the hole he'd been digging, came back up holding something. A waterproof case, military spec, the kind that could survive burial for decades without degradation. He showed it to Jake. Even from 200 yards away, Tessa could see the relief on both their faces. They'd found it, the hard drive, the evidence, the truth that could bring down Sterling Kane and expose corruption, and maybe, just maybe, give Declan's death some meaning beyond tragedy. Then everything went wrong at once. Lights blazed from 3 directions, floodlights mounted on tripods, blinding, overwhelming the night vision. Tessa ripped off her goggles, blinked against the sudden brightness that turned night into artificial day. In the clearing, Boone and Jake were frozen, caught in the open, surrounded. The tactical nightmare every operator feared. A voice boomed through a bullhorn, amplified, authoritative, the voice of someone used to being obeyed. "Master Sergeant Collier, Mr. Hawthorne, set down the case. Put your hands on your heads. You're surrounded by 20 contractors with orders to shoot if you resist." 20, not 6. The others had been hidden, waiting. This whole thing had been a trap from the beginning, a carefully orchestrated operation to let them find the drive and then take it from them along with their lives. Tessa's heart seized. Her crosshairs swept the clearing, counting targets. She could see 12. The others must be in the trees, in positions she couldn't identify. Positions that probably had her in their sights right now. Boone and Jake didn't move, didn't comply, stood frozen like statues, calculating odds that didn't favor them. The voice came again, closer now. "We know you're up there too, Miss Blackwood. Your grandfather's training is impressive, but thermal imaging doesn't care how well you hide. Put down the rifle, come out, or we start shooting your friends. You have 10 seconds to decide." Tessa's mind raced. They had thermal, had probably tracked her the whole time, every move, every position. She'd been in their crosshairs since she'd reached the ridge. One shot and she'd be dead. 10 seconds, then they die. The count began. 10, 9, 8. Boone looked up toward where Tessa was hidden. Even without night vision, even blinded by floodlights, he found her position with the instinct of someone who'd spent decades reading terrain. He shook his head, mouthed one word: run. 7, 6, 5. Jake's hand moved toward his rifle. A suicide play. One last act of defiance. One last middle finger to the people who thought they could kill with impunity. 4, 3. Tessa stood up, stepped into the light, rifle lowered, hands visible, making herself a target because the alternative was watching two good men die for trying to help her. "Don't shoot, I'm coming out." The relief on Boone's face warred with fury. Jake looked like he wanted to scream, but the contractors didn't fire, didn't move, waited as Tessa made her way down the ridge, through the trees, into the clearing where the floodlights turned night into day and truth into a weapon that cut both ways. A figure stepped forward from the darkness beyond the lights. Older, distinguished, expensive outdoor gear that had never seen real wilderness. Silver hair, confident smile, the smile of a man who'd won every game he'd ever played. Sterling Kane, in person, $2.3 billion wearing LL Bean and tactical boots. The man who'd ordered her grandfather's murder, who'd killed good men to protect profits and power, who'd corrupted a war and gotten away with it for 22 years. He looked at Tessa like a collector examining a rare specimen. Something interesting, but ultimately disposable. Ghost Blackwood's granddaughter, you have his eyes, that same stubborn determination that got him killed. He gestured at the waterproof case still in Boone's hands. "Thank you for finding that for me. I've been looking for 22 years, spent millions on the search, and you just led me right to it. Almost makes me wish I'd let your grandfather live. He trained you well." Tessa's voice came out steady, despite the fear coursing through her veins. Despite the 20 rifles pointed at her and the knowledge that she was probably about to die in a North Carolina forest without anyone ever knowing the truth. "You murdered him." Kane's smile didn't waver. "I solved a problem. There's a difference." He gestured to one of his contractors. The man moved forward, took the waterproof case from Boone's hands. Boone didn't resist. 20 rifles pointed at him made resistance a death sentence with no upside. The contractor brought the case to Kane. He opened it with the careful attention of someone handling treasure or explosives, or both. Inside, wrapped in layers of vacuum-sealed plastic, was a hard drive. Military grade, 2 terabytes, 22 years of waiting compressed into 6 ounces of silicon and metal. Kane held it up to the light. $847 million. That's what this represents. Evidence of contracts and transfers and business arrangements that would send me to prison for the rest of my life. He smiled, genuine pleasure. If it ever saw the light of day, which it won't. Jake spoke for the first time. His voice was cold, flat, the voice of a man who'd accepted death, and no longer cared about consequences. You killed my stepbrother, Garrett Stone, a man who served his country, who believed in something bigger than money, who died trying to do the right thing. I removed obstacles. Garrett Stone was an obstacle, as were Webb, York, Cross, and your grandfather, Miss Blackwood. Good men, I'm sure, principled, honorable, but good men who stood between me and the evolution of modern warfare. Kane's eyes sharpened, focused. Do you know what Vanguard Solutions became? What Sentinel Global Security does now? He didn't wait for an answer, didn't need one. This was a speech he'd probably practiced, justified, made peace with years ago. We don't just provide security, we enable policy. We make the decisions that weak politicians won't make. We keep wars running long enough to create stability, long enough to build infrastructure, long enough to reshape regions according to American interests, according to the interests of democracy and freedom and all the things that make the world better. You mean your interests? Boone's voice was thick with disgust. American soldiers died so you could get richer, so you could buy yachts in private jets and senators. That's all this ever was. Greed dressed up as patriotism. American soldiers die in every war. That's the job. That's what they signed up for. At least with Sentinel, their deaths meant something. Meant continued funding for the military, continued presence in strategic regions, continued influence for American power. Kane's expression didn't change, didn't show guilt or shame or any recognition that what he was saying might be monstrous. Your grandfather called me a war criminal. I called him short-sighted. History will decide which of us was right. But I'll be alive to see that judgment, and he won't be. Tessa's hands clenched into fists. Every muscle in her body screamed to move, to fight, to do something other than stand here listening to a man justify murder with economics and geopolitics and the kind of sociopathic reasoning that put profit over human life. You're going to kill us now. Not a question, a statement of fact, an acceptance of reality. Kane's smile widened. No, Miss Blackwood, I'm going to give you a choice. The same choice I gave your grandfather before he made the mistake of refusing. He pulled a phone from his pocket, tapped the screen with deliberate slowness, showed her what was displayed there. A bank account. An offshore account with a balance that made her breath catch and her mind go blank and her entire worldview shift sideways. $20 million. Wire transfer, instant, untraceable, split 3 ways. That's $6.6 million each. Enough to disappear anywhere in the world. Enough to live without worry. Enough to forget tonight ever happened. Enough to buy whatever life you want and never look back. The offer hung in the air like poison. Beautiful, tempting, absolutely corrupting. The kind of money that changed everything. That made problems disappear. That turned principles into luxuries you couldn't afford. Jake laughed. Sharp, bitter. The laugh of a man hearing something so absurd, it circled back to comedy. You think we can be bought? After what you've done? After the people you've killed? Everyone can be bought. It's just a question of price. Kane's eyes moved between them, reading, calculating, processing data. Your stepbrother couldn't be bought, but he was young, idealistic, stupid. You're older now. You've seen how the world really works, how justice is a luxury the powerful can afford and the powerless can't, how principles don't pay rent or put food on the table or matter when you're dead. Boone spat on the ground. Blood money. That's all it is. Money earned from the deaths of men who trusted their country, who believed they were fighting for something that mattered. All money is blood money if you trace it back far enough. Every fortune in history was built on someone else's suffering. Kane pocketed his phone. But I'll make it easier for you. Take the money and live, or refuse and die. Right here, right now. Your bodies will never be found. This clearing will be seeded and fertilized, and in 5 years, no one will ever know anything happened here. Your disappearances will be mysteries, tragic, but ultimately forgotten. Tessa's mind raced, looking for options, looking for leverage, looking for anything that might shift the calculus of this moment from certain death to possible survival. Her grandfather had been in this position, had been offered money, had refused, had died for that refusal. But he'd also left clues, had prepared, had planned for this moment, even if he hadn't lived to see it. "You need us alive." The words came out before she'd fully formed the thought. Instinct, desperation, hope, all mixed together. Kane's eyebrow raised. Interested, curious. "Interesting, why would I need that?" "Because you don't know if that's the only copy. My grandfather was too smart to bury one hard drive without insurance, without backup, without protection." She was bluffing, making it up as she went. But Kane didn't know that, couldn't know that. "For all you know, there are 3 more, 5 more, 10 more, hidden in locations only we know, places you'll never find without our cooperation." It was a bluff, a desperate gamble, a Hail Mary thrown into the darkness hoping someone would catch it. Tessa had no idea if there were other copies. Declan had never mentioned backups. But Kane didn't know that, couldn't know that, and doubt was a weapon when you had no others. His smile faded slightly, the first crack in his confidence, the first hint that maybe, possibly, he didn't have complete control. Your grandfather had 22 years to reveal evidence if he had copies. He didn't, which means this is it. This is the only copy. Or it means he was waiting for the right moment, waiting for people he could trust with the truth, people who would know what to do with it. Tessa took a step forward. One of the contractors raised his rifle, but Kane waved him off. "You kill us, you'll spend the rest of your life wondering if somewhere a backup exists, wondering if tomorrow's the day it surfaces, wondering if every journalist who calls, every investigation that opens, is the beginning of the end." Kane studied her face. Long seconds passed. The forest sounds seemed to pause, waiting for his decision. The floodlights hummed, generators running somewhere in the darkness. Electricity powering this moment where truth and power collided. "You're bluffing." "Maybe. Or maybe my grandfather taught me more than just shooting. Maybe he taught me about dead drops and insurance, and how to make sure powerful men stay awake at night, wondering if they've really won, or if they're just waiting for the axe to fall." The silence stretched. Kane's jaw worked like he was chewing on scenarios, calculating probabilities, running risk assessments in his head the way CEOs did, the way men with billions did when faced with threats to their empire. Finally, he spoke. "Prove it. Tell me where another copy is hidden, right now. If you're telling the truth, you'll know. If you're bluffing, you won't." Tessa's heart hammered. She had nothing, no proof, no backup location, just desperation and the hope that someone, somewhere, had thought ahead. Then Jake's voice cut through the tension, steady, confident, the voice of a man who'd just drawn a royal flush. "Fort Bragg, safety deposit box, Bank of America branch on Riley Road, box number 347, keys hidden in the base of the flagpole at the Special Operations Memorial. Your grandfather told me that night he called, week before he died, said if anything happened to him, that's where I'd find insurance, said you'd need it someday." Tessa stared at Jake. Was he telling the truth or making the same desperate bluff she was? His face gave nothing away. Stone, professional. The face of a man who'd learned to lie convincingly in places where bad lies got you killed. Kane's eyes narrowed. "Check it." One of the contractors pulled out a laptop, satellite connection. He typed rapidly, pulled up what looked like bank records. More typing. His face went pale. "Sir, there's a box registered under that number, rented in 2019, still active, monthly payments coming from an account registered to a David Morrison." Jake's father, Garrett's father, the man who'd lost his son and spent the rest of his life grieving. Maybe the man who'd helped Declan set this up. Maybe the man who'd understood that some fights continued long after the fighters died. Kane looked at the hard drive in his hands, then at them, then at his contractors. Mental calculations visible in the tightening of his jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, the shift in his posture from confident to cautious. There's a fourth option. His voice was silk over steel, smooth and dangerous. I keep you alive, but not free. Comfortable imprisonment, a facility, secure, off the books. You live there until I can verify every backup has been found and destroyed. Could take months, could take years, but you'd be alive. That's better than the alternative. That's not living. Boone's voice was flat, final. That's just slow death. Prison with better amenities. No different than killing us, except we get to watch ourselves waste away. It's the best offer you're going to get. Tessa's mind worked frantically. They were trapped, outgunned, surrounded. Even if they fought, even if they took some contractors with them, they'd still die here. The hard drive would disappear. The truth would stay buried. Kane would win. Everything Declan had fought for would be for nothing. Unless. I'll make you a counteroffer. Kane's eyebrows rose, amused, interested. You're not in a position to negotiate. I broke a 10-year seal record today, in front of 30 witnesses, with cell phone videos. That footage is all over social media by now. Military forums, shooting communities. Ghost Blackwood's granddaughter is famous as of 6 hours ago. Very visible, very public. So I'm visible now, very visible. If I disappear tonight, people will ask questions. SEALs will ask questions. The kind of questions that lead to investigations. The kind of investigations even you can't shut down completely without raising more suspicions. Kane's smile returned, but it was thinner now. You think your internet fame protects you? Influencers disappear all the time. Tragic accidents, missing persons cases that never get solved. I think it complicates your cleanup operation. I think it means you can't just make me vanish without consequences. Tessa took another step forward, close enough now to see the calculation in Kane's eyes, the weighing of risks and benefits. Here's my offer. We walk away, tonight, now. We keep the hard drive, you keep your freedom, and we establish a new kind of insurance, which is mutual assured destruction. We have evidence that destroys you. You have resources that could destroy us. We both walk away knowing that if either side moves, both sides lose. Cold War doctrine. It worked for 50 years between superpowers. It can work between us. The clearing went silent except for the hum of the floodlights and the distant sound of the creek. Kane stared at her like she was a puzzle he couldn't quite solve, a variable he hadn't accounted for in his equations. Your grandfather made a similar proposal. I rejected it. Look where that got him. And look where that got you. 22 years of paranoia, hunting down old men, spending resources on cleanup operations, living in fear that someday, somehow, the truth would surface. Tessa's voice gained strength, confidence born of desperation. Meanwhile, sentinels under congressional scrutiny, the Pentagon's asking questions. How long before someone makes the connection? How long before your house of cards collapses, not because we exposed you, but because you drew too much attention trying to silence us? Kane's jaw tightened. A muscle jumped in his cheek. For the first time since stepping into the light, he looked uncertain, not afraid. Men like Kane didn't do fear, but uncertain, calculating whether killing them created more problems than it solved. If I agree to this arrangement, there are conditions. Name them. The hard drive stays buried. Literally, you don't access it, don't copy it, don't show it to anyone. It remains in a secure location known only to you three, untouched, forgotten. Agreed. With a condition of our own. We create a dead man's switch. If anything happens to any of us, accidents, illnesses, mysterious disappearances, the evidence automatically goes public, no exceptions. Kane's lips pressed into a thin line. How would this dead man switch work? We have a lawyer, someone completely removed from this situation, someone who doesn't know what's in the package they're holding. They have instructions. If we don't check in every week, the package gets opened and distributed to every major news outlet in America. You can't kill the lawyer without revealing what you're hiding. You can't find the package without one of us telling you where it is. Mutual assured destruction. Kane turned away, walked to the edge of the clearing, stood there with his back to them, silhouetted against the floodlights. His shoulders rose and fell with deep breaths. The breathing of a man making a decision that would define the rest of his life. When he turned back, his expression had changed, still calculating, but resigned. The look of a man who'd been outmaneuvered and knew it. You have 1 week to set this up, 1 week to establish your dead man switch and prove to me it's real. After that, we revisit this conversation. If I find any evidence that you're trying to expose what's on that drive, the deal's off and you all die. Understood? Tessa nodded. So did Boone and Jake. Kane gestured to his contractors. Let them go, but I want surveillance. 24/7. If they so much as talk to a journalist, I want to know immediately. The contractors lowered their weapons, reluctantly. The tension in the clearing remained thick enough to cut, but the immediate threat of death had passed. For now. Kane walked past Tessa, stopped, spoke quietly enough that only she could hear. Your grandfather was a better man than I am, but better men don't change the world. They just die with clean consciences. He met her eyes. You have his skill. Let's hope you don't inherit his sense of martyrdom, because next time there won't be negotiations. There will only be bullets. Then he was gone, walking into the darkness beyond the floodlights. His contractors followed, one by one, until only the humming lights remained, casting harsh shadows on a clearing that had almost become a graveyard. The moment the last contractor disappeared, Tessa's legs nearly gave out. Jake caught her elbow, steadied her. That was the bravest or stupidest thing I've ever seen, he said. His voice shook slightly, adrenaline wearing off. I'm not sure which. Boone retrieved the waterproof case from where a contractor had set it down, held it like it was both precious and poisonous. We have 1 week to set up something that probably doesn't exist, to create insurance out of whole cloth, to convince Sterling Kane that we're more valuable alive than dead. The safety deposit box. Tessa looked at Jake. Was that real? Jake's expression was grim. I have no idea, but I figured if I sounded confident enough, he'd believe it. Or at least doubt. Doubt is all we needed to stay alive tonight. And the dead man switch? We'll figure it out. We have lawyers. We have resources. We have 1 week to build a cage that holds both sides. He looked at the hard drive. First, we need to secure that. Really secure it. Not buried in a forest. Somewhere that multiple systems would have to fail before it could be compromised. Boone was already moving, gathering their gear, erasing evidence of their presence. I know a place, multiple layers of security, off-grid, no digital footprint. We get there by morning, set everything up, and then we disappear until we built the framework Kane demanded. They gathered their equipment, moved through the forest with renewed urgency. Behind them, the floodlights shut off one by one, plunging the clearing back into darkness, erasing the evidence of what had almost happened, what might still happen if they couldn't deliver on promises made under duress. The hike back to Boone's truck took 2 hours. Every shadow felt like surveillance, every sound like contractors doubling back to finish what Kane had started. But they reached the vehicle without incident, drove through back roads in silence, each lost in their own thoughts about deals made with devils and whether survival was worth the compromises required to achieve it. Dawn broke over the Virginia countryside as they pulled into a storage facility outside Richmond. Boone had a unit there, climate-controlled, heavily secured. He opened it to reveal a space that looked like a prepper's dream, or nightmare. Supplies, weapons, communications equipment, everything needed to survive or fight or both. He also had a safe, biometric, key code, physical lock, the kind of redundant security that required 3 people to open and 3 people to close. They placed the hard drive inside, sealed it, set the protocols. Now it would take all 3 of them agreeing to access it again. One person couldn't retrieve it alone, even under coercion, even under torture. The system required willing cooperation from multiple parties. It was elegant. It was a network of tripwires and fail-safes that would activate if any of them died or disappeared. It wasn't perfect. Kane had resources that could potentially circumvent some of the protections, but it was good enough. Good enough that killing them became more risky than letting them live. Good enough that mutual assured destruction became more than empty words spoken in a forest clearing. 3 months passed. The kind of months where you wake up each morning surprised to still be alive. Who'd known Ghost Blackwood in Afghanistan, who wanted the legend's granddaughter teaching the next generation of snipers. Marines who would carry Declan's knowledge forward, who would learn to read wind and calculate drop and understand that shooting was meditation disguised as violence. She'd taken it, not just for the money, though the salary was better than 3 bartending jobs combined. Not just for the purpose, though having a mission beyond survival mattered, but because civilian, standing in front of them talking about precision shooting like she had any authority, like she belonged in a place reserved for warriors. She'd led them to the range without a word, set up a target at 2,000 yards, explained every calculation as she worked through it. Wind, distance, Coriolis effect, temperature, humidity, all of it processed without computers or apps or technology. Just math and observation, and the kind of knowledge that came from 15 years of training with a man who'd understood that excellence was built from thousands of small decisions done right. And then she'd shot. Dead center. The metallic clang echoing across the range like a bell announcing truth. The skepticism had evaporated, replaced by attention, respect, the hunger to learn from someone who'd proven themselves in the only language that mattered to warriors. Now, 6 months later, she stood in her office. Small, Spartan, but hers. On the wall hung a photo of Declan in Afghanistan, young, intense, holding a rifle like it was an extension of his soul. Next to it, the bullet casing from his record shot, the 2,500 20-yard shot that had become legend, that had become the key to finding truth buried in North Carolina soil. And next to that, her own casing, from the 2,400-yard shot that had broken a 10-year record and started a war she was still fighting, would always be fighting, because truth never stayed buried forever. It just waited, gathered pressure, until it exploded into the world in ways that changed everything. Her phone buzzed. Text from Jake. Just checking in. Weekly ritual. Part of their dead man switch protocol. Proof of life. Confirmation that the arrangement still held. That Kane hadn't moved. That mutual destruction remained mutual. She texted back. All good. Teaching good Marines to be great shots. Jake's response came immediately. Your grandfather would be proud. Tessa looked at the photo on her wall, at the man who'd taught her everything, who died protecting truth, who trusted her to finish what he'd started, even though he'd never said the words, had never explained the mission, had just trained her and trusted that when the moment came, she'd know what to do. She'd known. In a forest clearing with floodlights blazing and a billionaire offering millions to forget, she'd known that some things were worth more than money or comfort or even safety. That honor wasn't just a word. That legacy was something you built with choices made when everything was at stake. Another text, this one from Boone. Saw the news. Congressional committee investigating defense contractor fraud. Kane's company's on the list. Tessa smiled. The wheels were turning. slowly, but turning. Investigations that had nothing to do with buried hard drives or dead operatives. Just routine oversight that happened to be looking in the right direction. Maybe not today, maybe not this year, but eventually someone would dig deep enough, ask the right questions, connect the right dots. And when they did, the hard drive and its triple lock safe would be waiting, ready, a loaded gun pointed at the heart of corruption. Until then, she had Marines to teach, skills to pass on, a legacy to honor in the way Declan would have wanted. Not with vengeance or violence, but with patience, precision, the understanding that some shots took years to line up, that some targets required more than skill. They required time in position and the willingness to wait for the perfect moment. Through her office window, the next class of Marines was assembling on the range. Young, eager, some cocky, some scared. All of them about to learn that shooting wasn't about the gun. It was about understanding the world, about patience and observation, and the willingness to work harder than anyone expected because excellence demanded nothing less. Tessa grabbed her rifle case, the Remington 700 that had belonged to Declan, that carried his modifications and his notes and the ghost of his hands on the stock. Time to teach. Time to pass on knowledge that had been earned in mountains, in deserts, in forests, where men fought and died for causes both noble and corrupt. Time to make sure that Ghost Blackwood's legacy wasn't just a record shot or buried evidence. It was a generation of warriors who understood that precision mattered, that honor mattered, that some things were worth fighting for, even when the fight was invisible and the victory might take decades. She walked onto the range, 30 faces turned toward her, ready to learn, ready to be transformed from kids with guns into Marines with purpose. Good morning, Marines. I'm Tessa Blackwood. My grandfather was Colonel Declan Ghost Blackwood. He made a 2,500 20-yard combat shot in Afghanistan without a computer, without a spotter, without anything except skill and patience in understanding. Today I'm going to teach you how to do what you think is impossible. Because impossible is just a word people use when they don't understand the math. Let's get started.